Human Resource Issues, What a Small Firm Needs to Know with Barry Ackerman, episode 70. Are you ready to make your law firm a profit-generating machine that will free up your time and skyrocket your impact? With more than 2 decades of business growth experience and having proven that you can be successful while prioritizing your family and your impact, introducing the Profit with Law podcast. I am your host, the creator of the Firm Differentiator 10X Effect, Moshe Amsel. Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Profit with Law. I am your host, Moshe Amsel, and today I have a wonderful guest to share with you. This is a bonus guest interview episode, and this is a different type of guest than I've had on the show in the past. I've actually had one other person from my local networking group, and that was Jacob Sani, who I had a while back. So I'm an active member, actually on the board of a local networking group here in my community, and it really has no benefit for me specifically here in the Profit with Law side of business, but still I enjoy the face-to-face interaction with other business owners, and I really just enjoy being involved in that organization. Well, Barry sought me out after meeting me a couple of times at our breakfast, and we ended up having coffee together, and I got to chatting with him about what he does and understanding what he does, and I realized right away that he has great information and a message to share. And I said, you know what, we got to get you on the podcast. You got to be able to share this with my awesome law firm owners who are listening to Profit with Law. So I've got Barry here for you, and it turned out to be a great conversation. But real quick, let me tell you just a bit about him. So Barry started his career as an accountant and eventually transitioned to HR. While working as a full-time HR director for a large company in Brooklyn, he started coaching small companies on the side, guiding them through the complexities of HR. He then realized that providing outsourced HR services was something he loved and excelled at. Eventually, he left his day job and dove into Supportive HR full-time. That's the name of his company. Supportive HR is his baby, providing outsourced HR services to smaller companies that don't need a full-time high-level professional on staff. He takes great pride in his track record of successfully guiding many businesses through a wide range of HR scenarios and challenges. So I'm going to cut to Barry in just a moment, but I just want to remind you it's really kind of the last call. You're not going to hear about this anymore next week, and that is the free law firm expansion coaching sessions that I have been holding, 90-minute sessions where you get extreme clarity on where you want to go with your law firm, what's holding you back, and what's preventing you from getting there. Literally everybody who I've had this free coaching session, practically everybody, there's definitely one exception I can think of, but practically everybody that I've had on these free coaching sessions walked away telling me that the session was amazing, unbelievable, even if they didn't choose to join group coaching program that we have going on, which is starting next week, which is the 90-day law firm turnaround program. Even if they didn't sign up for that at the end of the call, which is definitely something I'm going to pitch to you if it's appropriate, they still got a ton of value from it. And if you've been on the fence wondering whether or not you should book it, it doesn't cost you anything except for 90 minutes of your time. So go to profitwithlaw.com/free coaching, profitwithlaw.com/free coaching. Look at the calendar, choose a slot, and put yourself on my calendar so that I can help you work through this in our 90 minutes together. Without further ado, I want to go and queue up that interview for you. I'm really excited about the information that Barry's going to share. Barry, take it away. Here you go. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. I'm excited to have you. And one of the reasons that I'm excited to have you is because we connected offline at a local networking group that I'm actively involved in, the RBBN, the Rockland Business Breakfast Network. And what's crazy is that that group has grown. We started it a little over a year ago, and we now have regularly once a month at our meetings at least 60 business owners that are in attendance, and it's just amazing how quickly it's grown. I met you at this networking event, and it took a while for us to really connect, like a little bit of chasing each other around, but ultimately we got together for coffee, and I really learned what it is that you do. And I decided that I wanted to invite you to come on the podcast because some of this stuff is really, really important to cover. And the reason it's important, that I see that it's important, is because when a person who is otherwise uninformed goes to start building their team and bring staff on, there's uh, a lot of things that they don't realize they need to have covered. And we're talking to an audience of attorneys. And even though this is an audience of attorneys and they're well versed in some basics of law, unless they are actually an employment lawyer or a business lawyer, they might not really know some of the things that you help cover as far as compliance, and not just compliance, but also just making sure that your staff is well informed. So I can't wait to dive into that information. But before we do that, I'd love it if you took a moment to share with the audience a little bit of your story, your background, how you got to where you are today, and how supportive HR ended up in existence, and how you work with your clients in supportive HR. And then we'll jump into some details that will probably be really insightful and helpful to our audience.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So I have a background in accounting. I have a degree in accounting. I started out my career in accounting, and I thought that was where I would continue and end my career. After quite a number of years in accounting, I slowly transitioned to HR. Basically, the short of it is that I was working in an internal accounting department for a relatively large company in New York City, and they didn't have a dedicated HR department. So the accounting team was handling the payroll, which is not so unusual for a smaller company. Then we started offering health insurance, and that landed on me as well. I was the member of the accounting team that was handling the payroll. I started taking care of the health insurance as well. And slowly one thing led to the next. I started doing recruiting, interviewing, eventually even morphed into employee relations. And it became quite clear that I was no longer doing accounting. I had become their first HR manager. I really enjoyed the work, which is why I started doing more of it. They obviously were happy with the work that I was doing. And I became officially their first HR manager, eventually hired somebody to work under me. Then moved on from there to a different company where I was the HR director. And I really dove into HR full time. I got certified by SHRM, the Society of Human Resource Management, which is a national organization that has a lot of resources and credentialing for HR professionals. So I really sort of upped my game a notch or two by pursuing that. And I started supportive HR a couple of years ago as a side gig while I was still an HR director during the day. I started as a side gig to be able to help small companies with some of their basic HR needs, whether it's putting together policies, just being a listening voice, giving some advice to management, how to navigate some challenging situations, which invariably do arise in any company. So I started doing that on a part-time basis while I still had a day job as an HR director. Eventually, towards the end of last summer, August, September of 2019, I left my day job and I actually switched my day job, and supportive HR became my full-time day job. So that allows me to offer much more to my clients because it allows me to be available to them all day long. So I can get out, I can meet with clients, I can service clients that much more, and I'm able to really deliver a high quality service to those small companies that don't have the budget, and they don't need a budget for a full-time HR professional on staff, but now they can get a lot of that peace of mind of having whatever they need.
Awesome. What a journey. So one of the things that really struck me in our conversation offline that I wanted to try and bring here to this conversation today is what we don't know, right? And let's start with this question: when you say HR, what does that mean? Like, what exactly is that encompassing? When I hear HR, I'm thinking benefits. I'm thinking, health insurance and paid time off, things like that. But I know from our conversation that it's very different from that, as far as how you define HR, and what it is that's in the scope of what you cover. So I think that if we outline what that is, then we can start diving into those things and really getting to the meat of what I wanted to share today.
Sure. Yeah, HR is a vast area of focus. There's the whole employee life cycle, which starts with recruiting, which really, before you start recruiting, you need to identify the needs. I just worked with a client, and I do this regularly. They want to fill a position. So I said the first step is you need to identify what the position is going to do. And now based on that, we have our essential responsibilities of the job, and then what kind of skills are needed to be able to fulfill those responsibilities. And now we can build a job description. We can now build a job posting and go out and try to get the best talent to fill this position. So it starts with that. Then it goes to hiring, interviewing. How do we identify the right candidate? Now that we have our job description, now we have to go find someone that fits what we're looking for. We have to know the right questions to ask when we're meeting with that candidate, and the right questions not to ask because they're illegal. That's definitely an area where some errors are made, unfortunately, because not everybody is aware of the questions that may or may not be asked of a candidate during the job search. So I help with that process. Then we bring the person on board. We have to make sure we're doing it properly. So there's a whole onboarding process that needs to be taken care of, whether it's getting all the right paperwork based on the location where a person is. There are federal requirements, there may be local requirements, what needs to be done, what may be done, may not be done in the hiring process. Continuing on to onboarding the person, actually bringing them on, getting them the appropriate training that they need to have to do their job successfully, making sure they have the resources that they need in order to do their job successfully. Do they have goals set up so that we know what does it mean to say this person is successful or not? How will we know if this person is successful? What does it look like? What are the parameters? What are we going to base that judgment upon, whether this person is successful or not? And then going through that is performance reviews, based on those goals. We should have performance reviews, regular check-ins with management. And then continuing along the life cycle as the person decides to hopefully stay as a career there and then moves on to retirement or whatever those next steps are, making sure that all those things happen smoothly. All of that is included in HR and many more.
Okay, so the way I see it is that there's basically two aspects of HR. One is focusing on the success of the employee and therefore the success of the employer, and the second is compliance with rules and regulations. Right? That's from the long response that you just gave and detailed response, which I appreciate. I saw that there's two totally different paths that we need to travel in this process. One is, okay, how do I logistically set this up so that I'm getting the right person and I'm setting them up for success? And then the second is how do I do this in a way that I'm complying with all of the laws and regulations and making sure that I'm not in violation of anything? So going down the path of compliance for just a moment, because I actually like the other path better. It's much more exciting to talk about
Much more.
But going down the path of compliance, first of all, are there federal and state and local regulations? Like, are they layered on top of each other? And how does somebody go about navigating that set of requirements? Is that something that is in your wheelhouse? Is that something that they should be having an attorney on board for before they hire somebody? What's the right path or the best path for somebody to navigate that when they're either a new employer or they're an existing employer, but they never really did this due diligence in the past?
Excellent question. So I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV or anything like it, but I am well versed enough, and I hope no lawyer is going to pounce on me for this, but I think this is okay to say. Just like people drive the car, you can get a driver's license without knowing every single law related to driving a car and owning a car. So the same way a person can hire an employee without being a lawyer, but they still need to know what they need to know when they hire that employee. So yes, there are certain federal requirements regarding certain forms that need to be completed or information that needs to be obtained. And then there are also state and even local laws, depending on where a person is, that will dictate different things that need to happen or may not happen throughout that process, whether it's related to questions that may or may not be asked of the candidate or a variety of other areas. So no, I'm not a lawyer, but one does not need a lawyer to be able to be confident that their hiring practices are compliant with the law. If something gets more advanced where there is a lawsuit at stake, then yes, it's a good idea to speak to a lawyer at that point.
When I was working in one of my previous jobs in a project manager capacity, I brought on temporary workers for a job, and we brought them on en masse. Like we're talking about, I hired 75 temp workers in a matter of a couple of weeks.
Wow.
Well, that's probably a stretch. It took me probably 2 months to bring all those people on, but it was very rapid.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the screening questions we had on the application was, were you ever arrested or convicted of a crime? And somebody replied no, and ultimately in their background check came up with an arrest. And we said, well, we don't have a problem with the fact that you were arrested, but we do have a problem with the fact that you lied about it. Now, ultimately, that ended up in a legal action because he felt discriminated against because of that, and ultimately it turned out that we were not allowed to even ask that question. So I feel like some of these things, until you're in it, you don't really know unless you go and get that help beforehand. So it's a tough road to navigate because, on the one hand, myself as on the business coach side, like I one of the problems that law firm owners face is whenever they want to do something, they get stuck in this mode of, I want everything to be perfect, and this mode of let me check all the boxes before I move forward, and they never take that step they need to take. So on the one hand, it's critical that they hire somebody way faster than they think they're ready, because that is what's going to move the needle in their business. But at the same time, I don't want to push them to do that without having the right level of due diligence. So is working with somebody like you that can help them with that compliance piece a good road to travel? Are they better off? They're just starting out, maybe just doing some of the research themselves. Like, what's your opinion, your attempt to get clients aside, right? What's your opinion on the best course of action for somebody who really just needs to take action and bring somebody on to do it, but without really setting themselves up for all kinds of issues down the road?
Right. That's a very fair question, and I'm not looking for every single person to become my client. However, to your point, a person does need a certain amount of knowledge and education before they go blindly into any endeavor. That being said, how much research does one put into an endeavor before they jump in? There's that risk reward. So a person has to decide sort of where they're going to get that basic information from, where they're pretty comfortable that they think they know what they're doing, and they feel comfortable enough going out and doing those first few steps. Now, that being said, I do make myself available at all different levels to clients that need all different levels of service. So I'm happy to work with someone just to get them through, helping them through hiring somebody. If they're a small company, they don't need any ongoing support. I'm happy to build a relationship with them so that I can be on call just to help them. Let's prep for an interview. Let's go over some of the areas we want to talk about. And then if the person has a question that he's planning to ask or she's planning to ask, and say, you know what, maybe don't ask that question, or let's word it a little bit differently to get the information you're trying to get without asking a question that's illegal to ask. We can do that without this person having to commit to any tremendous contract or long-term agreement, which I don't make any of my clients do anyway. But yes, I certainly offer all levels of service to be able to give people that peace of mind so that they can get through whatever their next project is that they're not sure about how to tackle it, I want to be able to help them get through that comfortably.
Okay. So, staying here on the legal side for a moment, what are some employment laws, pay practices, things like that we really should be aware of? Can you give us a broad strokes of and just some talking points so that that triggers a listener to say, "Oh, I really need this. This pertains to me. I really should look into that." We don't really need to go into all the detail today, but what are some of the things that we should know going into employment of our first employee, or now we've already have staff, but maybe we don't know about these things?
Right, sure. So a couple areas that are hot topics are 1099 versus W-2, or to use the more advanced terminology, independent contractor versus an employee. A lot of people decide, I have people as a 1099. You ask them why they have it that way. Well, it's just easier, or it makes more sense, or tax purposes. None of those are valid reasons, according to the government. And companies have gotten into big trouble. There are big penalties and fines involved with that. There are guidelines. It's not always black and white. There may be some gray area. A lot of that are areas that I can help with, and sometimes I'll need to go to an attorney if things can be even more murky. But there are guidelines as to when a person is considered an independent contractor and therefore should be paid on a 1099 versus when a person is an employee and they need to be paid on a W-2. And if the guidelines dictate that this person really fits the category of a W-2 employee, the company or the worker can't decide, well, I want to be paid on a 1099 because it works better for me, whatever that means. That's definitely a hot topic that companies do need to be paying attention to, because it's something that I've seen numerous times. Another area for time.
I'm going to
Sure.
defer a moment.
Absolutely.
I'm getting some feedback, so I'm going to let Zoom stabilize here. So, just on that topic of 1099 versus W-2, it definitely can be beneficial for both the employee slash independent contractor and the employer to have a 1099 relationship, because that allows the employee slash independent contractor to write off expenses that wouldn't otherwise be able to be deducted from income, and the employer doesn't have to pay their half of the Social Security tax and any other guidelines that, for example, here I'm in New York State. We have all kinds of insurance requirements when we bring an employee on. So all of a sudden we need workman's comp, disability, paid family leave, and the list goes on. And there's stiff penalties for not having that coverage. So it's not just the cost of the coverage, but it's also just the time involved in putting all that together. My first employee was my daughter, and I had to go through all of that just to hire my daughter and put her on payroll here. And it got to the point where I was almost like, to what end? Maybe I should just pay her out of my personal funds and
Right.
avoid all this hassle. Ultimately, I said, when I bring my next employee on, I'm gonna have to do it anyway. So I went there. But so I just want to highlight that the incentive to go 1099 is there from both ends potentially, and therefore you can get easily into murky situations where you try to do things that you even know yourself are probably not, as we would say, not kosher, right? The penalties and the ramifications of doing that is basically where you've avoided all of this payroll tax. You've avoided all of these payroll requirements. So now they can do a look back and go back, and if they determine 4 years later that this was indeed an employee, then all of a sudden you're on the hook for 4 years of payroll taxes and all these other tax requirements that you haven't been paying. So it could get really expensive, which is why you want to definitely avoid that. Okay, you were about to talk about overtime, so let's jump into that.
Sure. The overtime is another area that I see a lot. There's what the government calls exempt versus non-exempt employees. There's a law, FLSA, without getting too detailed and too technical here. Basically, any employee, the starting point is any employee that works 40 hours or more in a work week must be paid overtime for anything above 40 hours, and that's a federal law. Now, there are exemptions from that, or exceptions. So there's people that are non-exempt, meaning people that are subject to that requirement, and then there are people that are exempt from that requirement. And there are a few different categories of exemptions, but it's important to know. And that's also something that I've seen employers that say, well, we just pay this person $1,000 a week or $800 a week, and we don't track their hours because we decided they're on a salary. Well, that's very nice that you decided that, but if it doesn't fit into what the law says, then if that employee worked 43 hours in a week, then you may not have been able to pay that person the same $800 that you pay them every week for working 40 hours. You may have to pay them extra. And they'll say, but I just give them a flat salary. So even if they only did 37 weeks, I still give them 800. Okay, that may or may not be in compliance with the regulation. Depending on what the person's job responsibilities are, they may be exempt from overtime, and then you're fine. However, they may not be exempt from overtime, and now you really do need to be tracking their hours and making sure that anything over 40 is compensated appropriately.
What about them saying, well, the extra time was volunteer hours? Does that work?
No. They
All
can go
right.
volunteer at their local community center if they would like.
Very good. I asked that question actually, knowing that that's a place that people might go. As you know, I'm a paramedic, and the local ambulance corps are volunteer agencies, but they also pay staff during the day when they have difficulty getting trucks out because people are working. And it became an issue when they realized that they cannot employ the paid staff cannot be their volunteer members, because when they're both paid and volunteer, then all the hours count towards that employment. So they would probably be on overtime for that time that they're working during the day, if you add in their volunteer hours. So
Very interesting.
Yeah, very interesting issue that they were facing. All right, so we talked about 1099 versus W-2. We talked about overtime and exempt versus non-exempt employees. What about any sort of documentation, like a handbook or something like that, for them to understand what your processes and procedures are, and how things like that? Even in a small company, where does that fit in? Is it a requirement? Is it something that's good to have? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Sure. It's something that's an employee handbook, and which is comprised of workplace policies. It's a good thing for a company of any size to have. Now, that being said, someone's going to ask me, I have one employee, do I need a whole employee handbook? It's hard to say yes. But there is no clear line where once you hire your third employee or your seventh employee, it's hard to say at what point one must have an employee handbook. It's basically at what point do you want to make sure that you're covered. It's like an insurance policy in many situations. Now, there may be certain policies that must be in place. Depending on your location, you may have certain requirements regarding paid sick leave. A lot of jurisdictions are introducing that in the last couple of years. So that's a policy that certain companies, depending on their location, depending on their size, may be required to have a paid sick leave policy. Certain companies may be required to have a lactation leave policy, or different things like that, paid family leave, depending on where you are. There are a lot of policies that may be required of a company based on where they're located. So it's important to have a professional, an employment professional, an HR professional, or a lawyer put together an employee handbook that takes into account your company, where you're located, how large your workforce is. That will baseline is to cover the basic policies that you need to have set by the government. Then there's a lot more communication type stuff that should be an employee handbook, that should clarify to the employees what their general expectations are. It won't describe their particular job responsibilities, but it will probably talk about the general hours that the office is functioning. It will talk about the holiday schedule, when the employees are expected to work or not work, what their vacation policies are, their sick leave policies are, maternity leave, any other kind of leave policies will all be in the employee handbook, so there won't be any confusion where people don't know, are we off for President's Day? I don't remember, what did we do last year? I'm not sure. It's in the book, there are no questions, everything's clear.
Okay, and I know that you do work with handbooks. What exactly do you do when it comes to helping people with an employee handbook?
I work with the employers to identify what they need to address in the employee handbook. So some of that will be the basic, like I said, the baseline kind of things based on where they're located. Some of it will be federal, some of it will be state, some may be local. So we have to make sure we capture everything based on where they're located, that we're including everything that we need to include. Then we'll have anything that maybe not every company needs to have, but this company needs to have. Maybe they have an expense policy. They have traveling employees, so they need to track. They need to have a travel policy and an expense policy. How they're tracking all that. Maybe they have other specific things. Maybe they're working with the media. Maybe this company has a big public relations arm, so they need to have clear policies about that. That maybe some other companies won't need a policy about speaking to the media because it doesn't come up. So we'll talk through different areas, different challenges that each company is having and make sure to address them in the employee handbook.
Now, one of the things that I recently came across is a book called Radical Candor, and I'm actually just looking up the name of the author. And basically, the book Radical Candor by Kim Scott is all about how to give feedback to employees so that they can do a better job. And she starts off talking about how, at the beginning when she had an employee calls Bob in the story where, Bob was doing crappy work, and basically she would take it and fix it instead of going back to Bob and saying, hey, this is no good. You need to correct X, Y, and Z. She was afraid of hurting Bob's feelings. And it ultimately led to the point where she was doing all of this work for Bob and called him in and let him go because he wasn't pulling his weight. And he turned around and said, well, I could have fixed that. Why didn't you just tell me? So that's one example. But then on the other side, there's also wrongful termination that everybody's afraid of. And I'm not even going to where you're terminating, but how do you tread that feedback loop with employees to be able to speak your mind and tell them what's going on and try to get them to do a better job without saying something that can potentially come back and turn into discrimination or ultimately wrongful termination if they get let go later? Are there certain things that you should or should not be saying, or is that something that you just don't worry about and just deal with the issue and worry about it later?
Have not read that book, Radical Candor. I've heard a lot about it, and it's definitely a book that I should read, but I haven't gotten to it yet. But yes, regular feedback, open communication, honest communication is absolutely critical between management and employees. Employees need to know where they're at. They need to know what the expectations are of them and where they're up to with regards to those expectations. In the old days, once a year, an annual performance review, that's how it used to be. Most companies nowadays have moved towards more regular, at the very least quarterly, if not monthly check-ins, so that the employees know exactly where they're up to. And again, that's really relying, like you said, that the managers are able to have open communication. If the managers every month are just saying, yeah, good job, and then at the end of the year, by the way, you're horrible, that's just not fair. It's plain and simple not fair. But absolutely, there must be open, clear communication so that the employees know what the expectations are and they know where they're succeeding and where they need help, so that then they can actually turn to management and say, hey, I need help in this area. I'm having trouble accomplishing this task because here's the hurdle that I'm up against and here's where I need help overcoming this challenge. And then it gives management the opportunity to work with the employee and overcome that hurdle, which helps the employee be successful, which of course, as you said earlier in the conversation, helps the employer be successful, which is everybody's goal.
Okay, so going back to the employee and giving the feedback, and whether it's quarterly, monthly, any of that, anybody who's been in corporate knows that sometimes you have a conversation where you actually feel like they're listening and they actually know what you did and they're actually giving you feedback on your job. And at other places, they have a form that they're just going through and checking the boxes to say, I did it. I did your review. And I even had a job personally at a software company where I was definitely being discriminated against by my direct employer. And he made this whole show out of this process to demonstrate that he was doing it. So as an employer, how formalized does this process need to be? Do you have any guidance on what specific boxes we should be checking in this process? I'm more of the casual kind of, okay, I will just want it to be a conversation with this person and just an honest, hey, how's it going? How can we be a better employer? Let me tell you where our frustrations lie with you as an employee and where we're happy, where the things are going well, and just have that candid conversation. But at the same time, I know that if my company were to grow to 100 or 200 people, I can't expect that my management below me is going to be just as skilled in having that conversation. So at some point, we need to formalize it. So any guidance on how somebody can traverse this, this particular very important piece of employment, which is, that communication feedback and regular communication feedback with the employee.
Sure. Yeah, it's a challenge because you want to keep things open and relaxed to a degree. But you also, as an employer, you need to cover yourself. And that's, my job as HR. I work for the employer. I don't work for the employee. So yes, we want to make things as positive for everyone, and we should all be on the same team. But ultimately, the employer's got to make sure that they're covered. Because if someone does turn around and try to bring a lawsuit, lawsuit may be unfounded and may go out the window. However, many times the courts are really the jury will very often be much more sympathetic to the poor employee that was mistreated in their eyes rather than the big corporation that seems like the big bad wolf. So the corporation, the company does need to get ahead of that and have very strong documentation, which is also why having clear, measurable goals is very, very important. For some positions, it's very easy. For some positions, it's harder. But that's an important area that companies need to work on, is setting clear, measurable goals for each and every employee. And then those goals should be, the employee should be measured against those goals on a very regular basis. And then there's no guessing. If the goal is to make 10 sales a month and this employee made 2 sales a month for 4 months straight, so then that's clear this employee did not meet the expectations. So it's the more clear you can make those goals, the better, the stronger footing that company will be when it comes time to have the difficult conversations, whatever those conversations may be.
Okay. And speaking of difficult conversations, can we talk about termination? One of the hardest things as an employer is needing to terminate somebody. I believe that the bulk of my listenership, if not all of them, are heart-centered individuals. We care about our staff. We care about our clients. We're in this because number one, we're compassionate. Number two, we want to make money, right? So, and I've seen people keep employees on way longer than they should have because of that compassion, because they thought they were doing that person a favor, because they felt bad letting them go. And ultimately, that's another conversation where you kind of need to work on your own mindset and beliefs of whether or not you're helping them, because if you're not happy with them, they can't possibly succeed in that position. So maybe they'd be better off if you let them go and go find the place where they could succeed and they could thrive. So let's assume that we've gotten to this point where we need to terminate somebody. Talk about what does that look like, and what are the things that we need to be careful about? How do we have to be careful about what we say, how we say it, both from a compliance perspective and also from your experience as an HR person, from the human perspective? Like what does that process look like?
Yeah, it's a tough process and it's a tough thing to do. Something I've done more times than I care to do, but it's a very difficult area for many business owners. But like you said, it's part of running a business. It has to be done properly with compassion, but it does have to be done in some situations. A business owner has to realize that he's not doing a service to him or herself by keeping someone on that's not being successful for a number of reasons. First of all, this person may be coming into work every day depressed, knowing that they're not succeeding at their job, feeling like a failure, but they feel trapped. They don't have time to look for a new job because they have this job. They have to show up. They're struggling. They're drowning. They don't know what to do, but they're stuck. So in some ways, you may be actually helping the person by moving them out, giving them an opportunity to go look for something else. If you can give them a severance, it would be great. At the very least, they can collect unemployment. If they quit on their own, they can't get unemployment. Also, there may be pulling the team down. If everyone around them, which usually is the case, people around them can see this person is not delivering. They're just not. They're not up to par. Then why should the other team members be motivated to push themselves, right? If I see the person over there is giving 30% and still getting their paycheck, why should I give 100%? I'll give 30% too, or I'll give 50% and I'll become, the big hero over here when really I'm only giving 50%. That's a couple areas to think about. Another thing that I sometimes say to business owners when they say, well, I feel bad for this person. They're not going to be able to do any other job. They're just, they have a family and I get it. I understand it. I have a heart too. I really do. But I think, and I've said this to companies, if you want to become a charity, then maybe you're a charitable organization and that's very nice. But I'm not sure if keeping this person on in this position with that job title on the payroll is considered charity. There are companies that do community work. They donate to community causes and they get their name up there, and that looks great for that company. That's where the charity and the community service should go, not to keeping people on payroll that are just draining the company resources. That's not called charity, in my opinion.
Really good points, and I keep pausing when I start talking because of that feedback. So I apologize to the listeners. Zoom is giving us a little bit of feedback every time that I jump on the mic here. That was all great, but there's one part of the question that I think is still unanswered, so I just want to go back to it, and that's so now I've gotten to the point where I'm letting the person go. Is there anything that I need to know about that conversation when I'm sitting down with them and I'm saying, see you? One thing I know for sure is that a lot of people do a poor job of making it clear that that's what they're doing. Right. So they'll have that conversation with the employee, and the employee walks away not even sure if they were just terminated or not. Right. So maybe we can go there for a moment.
Absolutely. Yes, sure. No problem. Yes, I certainly can. I have coached people through that conversation where I actually had someone called me up the night before and said, I'm freaking out. I need to let somebody go tomorrow. I'm just totally freaking out. And I said, why are you freaking out? Let's talk. What's going on? So the person told me sort of the script that they had prepared. And part of this, the gist of the script was, I think it's time to part ways. And I said to this person, I said, first of all, you don't think. I said, you decided already. So the decision was made. And what does part ways mean? Part ways could mean different things. Part ways could mean that I think we should part ways for the day and we'll try again tomorrow. Maybe that's good. But also, well, you think, well, maybe I think something different. So let's have a conversation. No, be decisive. We have come to the decision that it's time to end your employment. No one wants to say fired. I mean, there's one guy who lives in a big house in Washington who seems to like saying you're fired. Most people don't say that. Most people say something a little bit more gentle, certainly with how I encourage. We have decided to end your employment effective today, or effective immediately. Very clear. End your employment effective today. There are no questions. There's no, well, what did that person mean? Maybe he meant that I still have a 1 month trial period. No. We're ending your employment today. We have decided. It's not I think, and we can talk about it for the next 10 minutes now while you plead your case, and maybe we won't because I'm still only thinking about it. No, I'm not thinking about it. We have decided to end your employment effective today. Another thing I would say is don't give a 15-minute introduction to that. Because the person is sitting there wondering where you're going. This whole 15 minutes where you're talking about how it was a great career and when they started, you thought it was going to be great and you were excited how things were going to go. Cut to the chase. The person is sitting there. There's another thing I should say. It should never be a surprise. The employee should have a pretty good idea of what's happening because there should have been warnings. There should have been a process before you got to this meeting. So the employee should have known already for a few weeks, if not a couple of months, that hey, there's improvement is needed in these areas. And the employee should be well aware of what the definition of improvement is. And they should know whether they met that or not. So at the end of those few weeks or those couple months, when you're having this meeting, the employee should know that this is their last day in the job. Or they should know, hey, I hit it out of the park, and this meeting is to say congratulations, great job, we're very proud of you. It should not be a surprise where the employee goes, what? Why? That should never be how the conversation goes. So that being said, cut to the chase. The employee has a pretty good idea that they have not met the expectations that have been laid out for them. So don't spend 15 minutes rehashing all the problems that were going on. Say, listen, we appreciate your service. We brought you on. We really thought we worked together, and we thought we could make it work. But unfortunately, we've decided the time has come to end your employment effective today. And then you go through whatever technicalities. You can let the person talk. You want to be a mensch, as we would say. Let the person, if they have some grievances to air, let them speak. It's obviously a very stressful and traumatic situation to be in for the employee. So you want to show some compassion, give them a chance to get things off their chest. If they're going to go on and on for half an hour, you're going to have to cut that short. But give them an opportunity to air some grievances, to unload a little bit within reason. Each person will react differently. Some people will just, get up and thank you for your service, thank you for the opportunity. They'll hand in whatever they need to hand in and be on their way. But other people may want to talk things out a little bit, and you should try to give them space for that. Again, within reason. Don't keep them there for an hour and a half while they go on, but try to do things with compassion.
One of the things that I think is human nature is when sharing this kind of news is to almost feel like an obligation to give a reason. So you feel like you need to go into that explanation. So I like that you were very clear on the fact that you want to say what you need to say, get to the chase, so they're not sitting there wondering what's going on. And you also don't want to. You should have already had all these conversations beforehand. So there should be no reason for you to have to launch into your reason. So I like the format of say what you need to say, let them know they're terminated, and then open the floor for them to share their grievances. Let them give you feedback as an employer of where they might have been unhappy, because they might not have been willing to share that before, thinking that they were going to potentially lose their job, retaliated against.
Right.
So now you have a very rare opportunity to get open and honest feedback about how you are as a manager, as an employer, and just understand that person is in the heat of the moment. So some of it might be a little bit stronger or more amplified than it really is, but there's always truth to every to every little bit of that. So you have to pick out those truths in order to make yourself a better person.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't want to end the interview on a low note of talking about termination, but we are just about out of time, and I have a pre-scheduled live interview I'm doing on LinkedIn this morning at 10:30. So it's now 10:20 for those who are listening to this not in real time, which is everybody. So we have about 10 minutes before I need to be on another live interview. So let me just ask this question. Is there anything else that you want to share? I'll give you an opportunity to share about yourself and how people can work with you in a moment. Is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners that is outside of the realm of termination that we did not cover that you think is really important for them to hear when we're talking about this HR conversation?
Sure. I think the broader picture of what HR is important for managers, for ownership to understand. A lot of small companies think HR is for the big guys. Chase Bank, they have an HR department, but little old me, I only have 20, 30, 40 employees, 5 employees. What do I need HR? And I think they should understand, and I think based on our conversation, we drew out some of those areas where even a small company can benefit from having some of the basic stuff. It gives them a lot of peace of mind that they know that they're covering what they need to cover. They're taking care of their employees properly. That's another area that we didn't talk about, a much more positive area, is giving the employees a voice, giving an avenue of communication between management and employees, where employees can feel comfortable opening up, not in the termination meeting, but throughout their employment, where they can send an email to HR and say, hey, here's something that's a concern that I would like to discuss. They're not going to go straight to their boss in a small company, but they'd like to go to somebody who can listen to them and maybe filter it through, maybe deliver it, maybe not, maybe they just want to be heard, but HR can help with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so as we draw to a close here, I'm going to summarize and then give you an opportunity here to share with our audience how they can reach out to you and keep in touch with you and potentially work with you. And the summary is this. When you're bringing on your first employee, or when you're running a small ship, 4, 5, 6, 7 employees, I'm guessing that probably until 10 employees, you don't have somebody in an HR role at the company. HR is basically falling on you, the law firm owner's shoulders. It's falling on it's one of those many hats that you're wearing. And you're certainly, unless you have an HR background, no expert on this subject matter. So why not go to somebody like Barry, who specializes in this and brings it to you as a service that my guess is reasonable for what you're getting, and therefore offload that hat, take it off, and kind of sub it out to somebody else or with somebody else to help guide you through this process, and just set you at ease, that knowing that you've taken the steps necessary, that you've covered the bases, and you're walking into this with some assurance that you've got your boxes checked, and you have your for no better way of saying it, you have your shit together, right? And and you're able to go and put that job posting out there and do the interview process and bring an employee on, and not be worried about, okay, what's at the next turn that I didn't think about. So Barry, how can somebody keep in touch with you? How can they reach out to you about talking about working with you, and what does that look like?
Sure. Well, I'm very active on LinkedIn. I try to post every day, so look me up on LinkedIn, Barry Ackerman HR. I'm right there. You'll find me pretty easily on LinkedIn. I have a website, supportivehr.com. Today, as of a recording, it's not live, but I believe by the time this recording is out for people to listen to, the website should be live. It's being finished up in the next few days. So supportivehr.com, that will outline some of the services that I do offer. And like I said, all different levels of service, depending on what a company needs. You're not going to be sold anything that you don't need. But I do think that you will find, every employer will find a level of peace of mind that they don't have today when you hook up with an HR professional, me or anyone else, just knowing that they're taken care of, that they have their ducks in a row.
Awesome, Barry. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming on the show. And this was a great conversation, and covering a topic that is just not talked about a whole lot. And I think it's important that we do talk about it, and I'm glad that we covered it today. So thank you so much for joining me. And until next time, we'll see you guys soon. Go out and keep those profits for yourself, and make that law firm profitable. Take a revenue generating activity today, and try to keep those expenses down so that you can take home more of the profit. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in the near future.
Thank you, Moshe. Bye-bye.
That's it for this week's episode of Profit with Law. If you have enjoyed the show, please consider sharing it with at least one person. Imagine how many lives we can change if we each shared this episode. Another way to share the episode is on social media. We appreciate your support and look forward to you joining us again next week.